The Garden of Eden. Are there any lessons there for the modern Christian? Are there any lessons in the serpent's temptation in the garden? Well, let's start from the place of Eden. What is actually Eden in the Bible? It is constant fellowship with God. Think about that. That's what Eden actually is. Constant fellowship with God. Now, the scriptures, without me, you can do nothing. That's actually the Bible. A lot of Christians don't know that scripture. That is the Bible. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Most of you know the scripture, except that a grain of corn falls into the ground and dies, meaning you're not supposed to have an individual will of your own. Jesus said, "Not my will, thine be done." We, the Christian, are not supposed to have an individual will. We're supposed to do as God tells us to do. We're supposed to do as God commands. And that produces a state of grace, Eden. The lesson of the fall, the serpent tempts Eve. What does he tempt Eve with? Two things to keep in mind. First of all, the serpent was the most subtle beast. Satan is the most subtle of beasts. Satan's temptation are subtle. That is why you're supposed to stay connected to the Lord at all times. Connected. But what is he tempting her to eat? Fruit from the tree of knowledge. What knowledge? Knowledge of good and evil. This is highly significant. We are not supposed to decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. We're supposed to read the scriptures. We're supposed to listen to the Spirit of God. And God tells us what is right and wrong. Why? Very simple reason. First of all, this is also in the Bible. All of a man's ways seem right in his own eyes. In other words, we self-justify everything we do. And we do what we want. We do what's pleasurable. We go after what pleases our senses. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, pride of life. Those are the ways that the world gets into us. How does it get into us? Because we like it. It pleases our senses. It feels good to our carnal man. That's why we're not supposed to decide for ourselves what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. Before I was a Christian, pornography was good in my eyes. I would turn it on. Hey, this is good. Hey, this is really good. Not knowing what I was doing. And then, of course, I would look for ways to justify my actions after the fact. I basically do what I wanted to do, what felt good to me. And then I would justify it after the fact. That's the way of the world. That's knowledge of good and evil in man's hands. That's what the tree represents. Do you understand? If you take onto yourself the power to decide good and evil, you are becoming God. You are taking away from God moral authority, and you're giving it to yourself. And this will produce corruption, the corruption that produces the state of the world. Why will it produce corruption? Because in our human nature, we're always going to do what feels good. And what feels good isn't necessarily good. It may actually feel good to punch someone in the face. You can imagine a scenario. Now, I hope you know what I mean with that. You can imagine a scenario where you punch somebody in the face and it feels really good. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's not an evil act. God alone decides what is right and wrong, good and evil, because he can be trusted as the absolute authority. We cannot. And it is in separating ourselves from God and trying to decide for ourselves that we create the world that we live in, which is not heaven, which is not Eden, which is separate from God and God's desires. That is the lesson of the Garden of Eden. That is the main takeaway from that. In your Christian walk, without God, you can do nothing. In all your ways, acknowledge God. All the scriptures pointing you back to the same idea, same principle, reiterated thousands of times in the Bible. Obey God, follow God, trust God. Let Him decide everything in your life, because He can be trusted. You can't, because you're going to do what feels good. You're going to do what seems good. You're going to do what your carnal mind tells you is good, but you are not necessarily going to be correct. That is the lesson of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Do not decide for yourself what is right and wrong. Seek the Lord, seek His counsel, read the scriptures.